All right, let's talk about something that can really bend your brain: quantum physics and faith. It's one of those topics where science and spirituality seem to get all tangled up, and a lot of people wonder, do they have to be enemies? Let's dive in and find out.
So, here's the big question we're tackling. Is quantum physics a threat to faith? For a lot of people, especially Christians, some of the ideas coming out of quantum mechanics can sound, well, pretty out there. And you've probably seen it, right? People using quantum buzzwords to back up worldviews that just don't line up with the traditional faith. So what's the deal? Is this amazing science really a threat?
Okay, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to look at how quantum physics got mixed up with mysticism in the first place. Then, we'll talk about a huge logical mistake people make. After that, we'll hit a major scientific reality check called decoherence. Then we'll clarify what quantum physics is actually for, and finally, we'll see how this all leads to a much more confident way for faith and science to coexist.
So, Section 1. This is really where all the confusion starts. Let's be honest, the language of quantum physics is just weird. It talks about things being uncertain, about everything being interconnected, about how just looking at something can change it. And because of that, it's become super tempting for some philosophies, especially those from Eastern mysticism, to kind of hijack its cool-sounding terms.
And this, right here, shows you exactly how that translation happens. A physicist will talk about something called entanglement, where two tiny particles are linked no matter how far apart they are. And someone else will hear that and say, see, cosmic oneness, we're all connected. Or they'll hear about superposition, the idea that a particle is in multiple states at once until you measure it, and they'll twist that into this grand claim that our consciousness literally creates reality just by looking at it. This is the heart of the problem we're going to unpack.
Okay, so that brings us to Section 2, where we see how this mix-up leads to a really critical error. According to our source material, trying to mash these two worlds together isn't just a bit of a stretch. It's actually based on a major logical flaw.
And that flaw has a name: false equivalence. It's basically the mistake of saying two things are the same just because they sorta sound alike. But think about it. Quantum physics is a scientific theory. It's built on hard math and experiments you can repeat over and over. Mysticism, on the other hand, is a metaphysical worldview. They're just not in the same category at all.
And here's the playbook for how it's done. It's a simple three-step trick, really. Step 1, you point to some bizarre quantum effect, like entanglement. Step 2, you find a spiritual idea that sounds a little like it, like we are all one. And then, here's the crucial and wrong final step. You claim that the science proves the spiritual belief. It gives the belief this shiny veneer of scientific authority it just hasn't earned.
Which brings us to Section 3. And honestly, this might be my favorite part, is this scientific reality check. You've probably heard of Schrödinger's cat, right? The poor thing that's supposedly both dead and alive at the same time in a box. But why don't we see stuff like that in our world? Why isn't your cat in some weird, fuzzy state of being? Well, the answer is a really cool process called decoherence.
See, down at that super tiny subatomic level, reality is like a fuzzy game of probabilities. Particles can be in a bunch of places at once. Everything is uncertain until you lock it down by measuring it. It's a world that makes absolutely no sense to our everyday brains.
But that's not the world you and I live in, right? Our world, the big macroscopic world, is clear, it's predictable, my coffee cup is on my desk, it's not in a superposition of being on the desk and on the floor. Thank goodness, things are stable here.
So how do we get from that blurry quantum mess to our crystal clear reality? Decoherence. You can think of it like this. A quantum system is constantly bumping into its environment. Air molecules, photons, you name it. And all those little interactions force it to pick a state almost instantly. It's like a firewall that keeps all the quantum weirdness trapped down in the subatomic realm. It's the very reason you can't use quantum effects to make claims about our big everyday reality.
So, that scientific firewall is a huge piece of the puzzle, but there's another piece, and it's all about understanding what quantum mechanics is actually trying to do. What does the science itself claim to be telling us about the universe? This is so important.
Okay, now this term sounds way more complicated than it is: scientific anti-realism. But the idea is pretty simple. Quantum physics is not trying to give you a perfect photograph of ultimate capital R reality. That's not its job. Instead, what it does is provide these incredibly powerful mathematical models that let us predict with stunning accuracy how the physical world is going to behave.
This table lays it out perfectly. Let's look at the job description for quantum physics.
What does it do? It gives us models, it makes crazy accurate predictions, and it describes how matter and energy work. Now, what doesn't it do? It doesn't reveal the ultimate nature of God. It doesn't prove or disprove spiritual ideas. And it's not meant to be the foundation for your entire worldview. It's an amazing tool, but it's not a theology.
All right, let's pull all these threads together in our final section. When you take these three big ideas, the logical mistake, the science of decoherence, and the actual purpose of the theory, a much, much clearer picture starts to form.
So here are the 3 reality checks we've covered. First, trying to prove mysticism with quantum physics is a classic false equivalence error. Second, the science itself gives us decoherence, that firewall that keeps the quantum weirdness from leaking into our world. And third, quantum physics itself knows its limits. It's a tool for prediction, not a map to ultimate truth.
And that leads us to this really powerful conclusion from the source material. When you see it this way, you realize that people of faith, including Christians, have absolutely nothing to fear from quantum mechanics. It's not some secret portal to a different spirituality, and it's definitely not a threat. It's just a beautiful, rigorous, and mind-blowingly successful way of understanding the physical world that God created.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to chew on. When you really understand what science is for, and, just as important, what it's not for, you can appreciate its incredible power without trying to make it answer questions it was never designed to tackle. So, the question for you is, how can knowing the proper boundaries of science actually make your own worldview, whatever that may be, even stronger? Thanks for digging into this with me.